Russia launched attacks on multiple cities in Ukraine on Wednesday evening, a decisive escalation after months of military buildup that stirred dire warnings from the United States and its allies. Air raid sirens rang out across the central capital of Kyiv, and explosions were seen and heard there and in other cities across the country, NBC News reporters on the ground said. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky declared martial law across the country, closing schools, placing hospitals on high alert, and telling everyone not involved in crucial infrastructure to stay at home. Ukraine said that the Russian military was attacking with the help of Belarus, one of Moscow's only allies. Although Russian troops have been deployed to Belarus for months, NBC News was not immediately able to confirm Belarus' involvement in the attacks. Ukraine said its troops would return fire, and it was clarifying information on injuries, its interior ministry said. The first blasts came just minutes after Russian President Vladimir Putin said, in a public address, that he had authorized a military action against Ukraine. Putin said he was taking action to demilitarize Ukraine, because the West had pushed too far in trying to draw the country into the NATO alliance and had threatened Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine. I urge you to immediately lay down your weapons and go home, Putin said, speaking to Ukrainian soldiers during a special televised address. There is little evidence of Russia's claims of Ukrainian aggression, and the U.S. has been warning for months that Moscow was trying to manufacture a pretext to start a conflict. Putin also warned against any retaliation from other countries. The response from Russia will be so severe that no foreign nations have ever experienced it before, Putin said. All decisions have been made. Ukrainian officials reported that cruise or ballistic missiles targeted military control centers in the Kyiv area. Reporting from the capital, NBC News' Aaron McLaughlin said that, as dawn broke, people here are terrified. They have been staying up all night monitoring the situation, and there has been an element of disbelief up until this point that the Russians would go after the capital. Ukrainian officials said the full invasion had begun. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said in a tweet that the world can and must stop Putin. The attacks drew swift rebuke from President Joe Biden, who vowed to take action. Russia alone is responsible for the death and destruction this attack will bring, and the United States and its allies and partners will respond in a united and decisive way, he said in a statement. The world will hold Russia accountable. Russia has surrounded Ukraine on three sides with some 150,000 troops, in addition to air and naval forces. The buildup, allied with Moscow's bold security demands, prompted fears of an invasion and stark predictions for civilian and military casualties. The move leaves Europe facing one of its gravest security crises since the Cold War, and Biden confronting perhaps his greatest foreign policy challenge since taking office. He previously said a Russian invasion would be the most consequential thing that has happened in the world, in terms of war and peace, since World War II. It comes after a tense standoff between Moscow, the U.S. and NATO over the Kremlin's desire to halt what it sees as its neighbors' unacceptable drift toward the West, a trend at the heart of Russian demands that formed the basis of weeks of diplomatic efforts to ward off a deadly new conflict. Putin has also repeatedly said he does not believe Ukraine has the historical right to exist as an independent country from Russia. The fresh crisis comes 8 years after Moscow annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula and backed pro-Russian separatists in the country's east, a conflict that has remained unresolved and claimed an estimated 14,000 lives. In recent days, an escalation in shelling there, followed by Russia recognizing the breakaway region's independence and sending in troops, stoked fears that Putin was creating a pretext for an attack. The Kremlin said Wednesday that the separatist leaders in eastern Ukraine had asked for military assistance to defend against what it has called Ukrainian aggression. In reality, there is little or no evidence Ukraine has been attacking the separatist regions, and Russia's actions have been widely seen in the West as attempting to concoct a pretext for war. Focus is also turning to Biden's next steps and the response of Western leaders who have already imposed sanctions on Moscow but vowed more severe consequences in the event of such an attack. The response could take many forms, from personal sanctions against Putin to banning Russia from the SWIFT global payment system. Biden has ruled out sending U.S. troops to Ukraine, but sent millions of dollars worth of military aid to Kyiv and deployed thousands of troops to Eastern Europe to bolster NATO allies. Russia's move caps off years of tensions between the Kremlin and the West, sparked by Washington's accusations that Russia meddled in the 2016 presidential election, used chemical weapons to go after its enemies abroad, and intensified a crackdown on any form of dissent at home. After seeking a pivot to Asia to counter the threat of China, the U.S. may now be forced to turn its focus back to Europe as Putin moves to restore Russia's influence over its neighbors. 3 decades after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Putin's endgame in Ukraine has dominated conversations in Washington and in Europe since late last year, with military analysts split on his plans after diplomatic efforts by Western leaders made little progress. Throughout the standoff, Moscow demanded security guarantees that would include a stop to NATO's expansion eastward and a formal veto on Ukraine ever joining the military alliance. The demands were largely dismissed by the U.S. and its allies, but leaders in Washington and Europe have continued to seek a peaceful resolution to the crisis.